Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ika Vat. On Double 10 Day, we're asking whether Taiwan's democracy is under threat from China or whether China's autocracy is under threat from democracy. With me to discuss this are William Stanton, former American Institute in Taiwan Director, National Chengchi University Chair, Professor, and Charles Wu, National Chengchi University Department of Diplomacy Professor and Chair. Ambassador, Professor, welcome to the show today. But first, Taiwan was ranked #1 in Asia, yet again, by the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index in 2022, the latest year available. Taiwan came in at 10th globally, ahead of Japan and South Korea, and China is ranked 156th. Taiwan is part of only 8% of the world classed as living under a full democracy. To rank the countries, 60 indicators are measured across 5 major categories. They are electoral process and pluralism, political culture, participation, functioning of government, and civil liberties. Bill, let me come to you first. So we know from The Economist how the index was made up and why Taiwan scores consistently highly. It must be that Taiwan has free and fair elections, good political participation, a strong civil society, etc. Now, it also tends to do well in safety rankings, livability indexes, that sort of thing. Is Taiwan's performance remarkable, do you think, given the democratic backsliding across the world? And the EIU says 2022 was the second lowest point since it began these records in 2006.
Yeah, I think Taiwan is, well, as I tell my students, I think Taiwan's a modern miracle because Taiwan not only developed into a full-blown democracy, but it also is a huge economic success. And when you consider that Taiwan has virtually no natural resources, what accounts for that? And it's the Taiwan people. Taiwan people, their intelligence, their education, their scientific, technological innovations and discoveries.
Is there a link, Bill, between the economic success and the democracy?
I think so, because in Taiwan, as it evolved into a democracy, it also became more economically successful. And Taiwan prospered. And, you know, I try to inculcate all my students a sense of how successful Taiwan has been. They're not, you know, it's also a success, and one of the things I point out, there's also a ranking for which countries expats most enjoy. And Taiwan's always very high up, and Taipei is always very high up in preferences for expats. And of course, you know, since I've lived here now in my life almost 15 years, I can attest to the fact that Taiwan is a safe, enjoyable, not so expensive place to live and live a good life.
Charles, what is it that makes Taiwan so strong in its democracy, whereas we have other examples where there is backsliding?
Okay, when we talk about democracy and also the index, I think economist index is a good measurement. However, when we talk about the defined Western democracies, I download the Freedom House data set, which is now in academia and also in think tank, people using that to describe how democratic a society it is. Taiwan, we can see that in the map. We are 1 out of 4 countries ranked as democracies in East Asia and Asia Pacific. For example, Mongolia, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and Australia, and New Zealand. Okay, but in East Asia, Taiwan is we rank very high as a democratic countries. And in the Freedom House, we know that they have 3 categories. One is called free, partial free, and non-free. But when we say define democracies, we look at 3 categories. And why Taiwan is a free country in this data set? Because Taiwan, we have free political systems, the campaign systems. We have free religious systems, and also people have the media press. We have pretty free.
And in that index, is Taiwan actually higher than, say, South Korea or Japan? Or is it?
Yes, we are very close to South Korea and Japan in the Freedom House index.
Okay. Now, to get to more of the underlying factors to Taiwan's democracy, my next guest is Tao Yi-fen, National Taiwan University Associate Professor in Political Science. I spoke to her from Taipei earlier. Let's take a look.
I think given the fact that democracy is declining around the world for almost 2 decades now, and the Taiwan Strait is considered as the most dangerous place in the world now, it's really a great achievement for Taiwan to be ranked as #1 democracy in Asia. I think as an immigrant society, Taiwan has a very democratic culture from the beginning. Just like the United States, we don't have aristocracy, and we never had a feudal system before, except the Aboriginal people. Everyone in Taiwan is the son and daughter of immigrants or refugees. Socially, we are very relaxed and very equal to each other. I think the global decline of democracy is highly related to growing income inequality around the world. After 30 years, the backbone of Taiwan's economy is still manufacturing. It made our economy very stable and the income distribution relatively equal. And another factor is a very distinctive Taiwanese identity. It has been growing hand in hand with democratic value after the end of authoritarian rule. Uh, for last 30 years, Taiwanese people have been asking themselves, what does it mean to be a Taiwanese? And I think a very distinctive non-Chinese Taiwanese identity has grown. So I think democratic value have been deeply rooted in Taiwan's distinctive identity. Being democratic is the core value of being Taiwanese.
Now, between the Democratic Progressive Party and the Kuomintang, the two main political parties in Taiwan, there have been transitions of power. Now, how important would you say these transitions are? What does it mean for Taiwan's democracy?
I think in Taiwan, it is very clear that democracy is the only game in town. We have been through 3 peaceful power transfer, and no matter the incumbent is KMT or DPP, they will accept the election result and hand out the power peacefully. I think the most credit should give to Taiwan society. We are a society very care of democratic process. International scholars and journalists came to Taiwan to observe our elections. They are fascinated. So many volunteer workers involved. That it is so sophisticated and so peaceful and smooth. We have very high trust on the whole election process.
Ambassador, so later in that interview, Professor Tao told me that Taiwanese should be very proud, as you've said yourself, that despite facing, democratic backsliding elsewhere and also a big external threat from China, that Taiwan's democracy has been maintained, it's still very healthy. Can you explain to us exactly what threat China poses to Taiwan's democracy? I mean, are we only talking about, sort of military action where China possibly annexes Taiwan, or are there other threats that we're talking about?
Well, that's the underlying great threat, but in addition, there are the continual exercises, military exercises surrounding Taiwan, which are not only exercises, but in a way, planning efforts for what an attack might look like. And of course, this weighs heavily on people's minds. But there are many other kinds of potential warfare. There's a book that was written called Political Warfare by a former Marine colonel who was a professor at Zhengming for a year or two, Kerry Gershanik, and he talked about other
He's also
ways.
been on our show, actually.
The other ways in which China was threatening Taiwan. These included, for example, influence on the media. There are certain media outlets that are clearly very sympathetic to China and its points of view.
And they're called red media. Is that
Red
right?
media.
Yeah.
There's also clearly the influence of the Chinese on, for example, some temples. There is influence on the with some of the gangs here in Taiwan. There's also the there's espionage that goes on. We see reported in the newspapers cases where people have been arrested for espionage. There are also ongoing cyber attacks against Taiwan. So there's many efforts, I think, on the part of China to both manipulate, to create unease, but also to persuade people that it's just not viable to remain a democracy. It's just not viable not to unify with China. And I think for some people this is persuasive. It's also unfortunate, actually, that some of the political leaders in Taiwan keep on talking about things like, well, maybe we ought to have a bridge between Jinmen and the mainland. Maybe we ought to go back to the idea of the 92 consensus, which, as near as I can tell, never really existed. So there are a lot of people who continue to say, oh, well, we need to take a more placating attitude towards China. We need to try to get along more. And of course, China doesn't feel that way. They don't make any gestures along those lines.
So are you saying that you see some political leaders as, being game to or being part of, in a sense, China's influence campaign?
Yeah, I'm always disappointed, particularly when I see people who have made their fortunes in China, somebody like Guo Taiming, who then is running for president, but he's made billions of dollars in China, and clearly he seems to have backed off a little bit now, but he seemingly is talking about having a solution that is more peaceful with China, but he never defines what that would mean.
Right. Charles, how has Taiwan resisted all of this, the influence campaigns, the persuasion that Bill talked about?
This is one very important question is when we weigh between the economic activities and democracies, we should be very clear is that it's a question about bread and love. Is bread and love, you choose bread or you choose love. Bread is kind of ideology of values, right? Bread is like money and love is got values. But for a lot of Taiwanese, especially I think more than 1 million Taiwanese business people, some of them, they are supporting Taiwan independence. However, they still want to get some economic benefits from mainland China. Some of them, they want a reunification, so they also invest in mainland China. So we see they are also Taiwanese people. So if we say you cannot make money in mainland China because you have democratic backslides, we call it assumptive questions, because this is not gonna happen. Taiwan is a small island. We always need a huge markets for economic investments. Let us say, if we can hedge, manage this kind of investment to other countries or areas, probably we can have better result and resolutions for this. However, so far, I don't see any parties that can really resolve these issues.
Bill?
Well, I suppose so, but I mean, I see people grappling all the time when I see young people who are worried about their careers, worried about their futures. And there was an article just recently by Michael Turton in Taipei Times. He was worried about the fact that there aren't enough employment opportunities for young people. This is an ongoing threat. It's also a threat in the United States when people say, well, I can't make enough money. So what's the alternative, and where should I go?
And so for Taiwanese youth, is Michael Turton, is the fear that they will be drawn to China because so-called there are economic opportunities in China, but that's actually dwindling too. Yeah. Is that not correct?
Well, that's true. Right now, China is not exactly the place to go if you're unemployed, since they have over 20% unemployment themselves. But in the past, at least, when talking to students, I've never heard a student say, well, maybe I'll go and work in China. But of course, that's always been an alternative in the back of some people's minds. But I think up till now, there remain enough opportunities, by and large, for most Taiwanese that they wind up staying here. It's far more likely that if they leave, they might go for a while to the United States, As an American, I would welcome that because the U.S. benefits whenever we get Taiwanese in the United States. They've always been great contributors to the U.S. economy, to U.S. society. So, but I do think that sometimes Taiwan needs to pay more attention perhaps to domestic issues because that is the biggest challenge. As long as his life is progressing here, I don't think people will look for alternatives.
Charles, let's go back to, it's tied into what Bill just told us. The Professor Tao also mentioned that income equality, distribution is key to maintaining a strong democracy. So if Taiwan's economy, if it doesn't provide opportunities or it's finding difficult to find opportunities for its young people, does it make it more susceptible to China? However, we can also see that China has its own problems.
I mean, I talk to a lot of young people. Also, we are teaching young people. The very first idea for them is how can they survive, especially facing the low wage, high real estate, high housing, low birth rate. We call it strong competitions in islands. We are not the only one country in the world facing this kind of challenges. Yeah. South Korea even have more tougher situation than us. But this is all because it's the result of capitalism. We need to agree with that. Then how Taiwanese young people to overcome it.
But the same problems are happening in China.
Yes.
Is that down to capitalism?
Young people right now, they are very clear how they are separate the political ideology and the economic activities. They were chasing for money, they're chasing for job opportunities, they are chasing for any kind of career developments, no matter where it is. Some people go to Southeast Asia.
Do they care about democracy?
One thing is, if they are really weighed the democracy above their personal career achievements, they probably will care, but we don't know about the overall young people. I talked to some young people, they don't care. They just want to make money, and they chase places for leave, for career development, seriously. But one thing I want to mention is Taiwan would provide a very good platform for young people. You need to cherish this system because this system is not, dropped from the sky. We cultivate this system for decades.
Well, there was actually a lot of bloodshed for this system.
So this is why we need more
decades.
education. Tell the people what is real democracy. Democracy doesn't mean polarizations. Democracy doesn't mean populism. Democracy needs education. Let them know which is the true democracy is. Okay? Because so far, we are kind of worried about the development of democracies in the world.
Bill, the professor mentioned that the Taiwanese identity itself is tied to democracy. Do you feel, we've heard what Charles has said about his students. Do you feel that the young people or Taiwanese in general do understand that? Do appreciate that?
My sense is they do. We discuss a range of countries, important key countries in the world in my class, and the geopolitical factors that contribute to that, including democracy, including economic achievements. And I think the students appreciate that that's one of the reasons Taiwan's been successful, because it has been a democracy. And they also can look across the strait and they can see what's going on in China. It's not particularly attractive. They see you can become a billionaire, but then recently it's been pointed out in some articles that an awful lot of the billionaires have now been arrested. There were more than a dozen that I saw, I think it was Inside Business reported on. And these people just, on the decision of the Chinese Communist Party, they can suddenly be arrested or disappear and go away. And so in that kind of uncertainty, in that kind of opaque political system, I don't think somebody raised in freedom, anyone is going to be readily convinced to adapt or try that kind of a system.
Charles, let's move on to China's democracy. It says, Xi Jinping has said in the past that it has its own democracy, so-called people's democracy or whole democracy. Can you take us through, how that system differs to representative democracy that we know? Why is it that they can claim that is a form of democracy, and some very top-level advantages, disadvantages?
Yeah, this is interesting questions. From the education I received, the Chinese style democracy is not we call it really defined democracies, because they don't really have, we call it, the turnover of the governments. China has one-party politics. Xi Jinping is a one-man authoritarian, control the powers. So he's in the echo chambers. In the real democracies, you cannot have echo chambers because your opposition party always want to challenge you, try to draw you down.
But they say that they have elected positions through the was it two
meetings.
2 million CCP members.
Yeah, this is one thing. They have we call the elections, or we call it let people talk or say something. Is in the National People's Congress. Each March and April.
Bill, would you like to add to that? I mean, there's 1.4 billion people in China. We've got to mention that versus 2 million CCP members.
Well, but there's only one real decision maker in China, and that's Xi Jinping.
Right.
And
The oligarch.
increasingly, I think most China hands, most experts who look at China say actually under Xi Jinping, China's become increasingly authoritarian. It's increasingly one-man rule. He decides on everything. And one of the downsides of that, similar to what's going on in Russia, is that people are afraid to give any advice to Xi Jinping that's counter to what he wants to do, what he thinks is the right way. The decisions he's been making have gotten worse, and it's put China in a bad way economically. His decision, for example, on the crackdown on COVID-19, in fact, led to an awful lot of problems. He finally suddenly abandoned it, and a lot more people died as a result. His decision-making, the record is not very good. So I think it's quite clear that that kind of so-called democracy does not work.
Charles, you know, there has been a lot said about Xi Jinping's fear of the population, really. And I wanted to ask you whether you thought that Taiwan actually poses an existential threat to China because of Taiwan's democracy. I mean, because, you know, Xi Jinping or the CCP would like to say that Chinese people cannot live under a democracy.
This is a good research topic for a long time, whether China can have we call it Western democracies, because people talk about when you're middle class, you know, expansions, the country will transit from autocracy to democracy. However, if we look at the Chinese developments, especially the middle class, they didn't experience this kind of transitions. Now they have a huge amount of middle classes, but they didn't experience any kind of democratic transitions. So people start to study why China cannot have, we call the so-called democracies. Because the larger populations, because the history, the culture, or it's because Chinese itself, they just get used to this kind of, we call the one-man ruling party system. So, I mean, we can talk for a long time about this. But like what I say, if China really afraid of Taiwanese democracies, they will do something to that. But right now, I'm confident. They have, Chinese people or government, they have confidence about their system. We call this kind of one-party system, one-man system, and they know how to control their people's mind and voices to maintain the CCP, maintain the positions.
Yeah, and yet, Bill, you have recently written about how Chinese people vote with their feet.
Yes. It's true. I mean, I would have been astounded years ago if anyone had told me that there would be Chinese citizens lining up at the Mexican border. At their own expense, they've traveled usually to Ecuador first because it's visa-free, and then paying people or to help them get to the Mexican border and then crossing over. There have been thousands now.
But in the last 10 years, have those figures increased or?
Very recently, they've increased. I would say in the last few years, I think they've been increased. It's been a sort of an invitation letter to Chinese who say, hey, we can do better if we go to the United States. And that's why there's a substantial Chinese immigrant population in the United States, and indeed immigrants from all over the world in America.
And Charles, Taiwan's democracy is often called an example, you know, for the region, for the world. What does Taiwan's democracy mean for the region, and what does it mean for the United States?
we are in a very free societies. We can do anything we want. We can say anything we want. We go to Facebook, Instagram for free. Okay, so this is what I want to say is our next generation, they need to cherish these opportunities and also developments. We work for a long time. However, like what I say, we are in a free societies. Then we should give the young people or next generation a free choices, options. They need to know. Okay, if they want to chase more developments, they can go to the United States, go to China, go to Southeast Asia, to any kind of countries. They go to expose, to try to experience these kind of different adventures. One day, when they realize that how Taiwan, our advantage, and they will come back to Taiwan and cultivate these islands. This is what I want to say.
Okay, and Bill, very final question. You're a former AIT director. Can you tell us what Taiwan's democracy means to the United States?
I think it's evidence that democracy works. I think it's evidence that the United States policies in Asia have been, in the case of Taiwan, certainly a great success. We've helped Taiwan. We help now defend it. And I think it's sort of a model, a shining light in Asia for the direction we would hope other countries would move. So I think Taiwan is basically a valuable partner for the United States, and it's a valuable model for the world of the direction a country can go and be successful and yet be free.
Well, Ambassador and Professor, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.